First of all, I'd just like to say that I'm still alive, I'm not dead, I haven't been banned by YouTube yet. I know that I haven't uploaded any videos in several weeks, and there are a number of reasons for that, all of which basically boil down to the fact that I'm having a hard time finding the necessary amount of time in my daily schedule to make these videos. So please do keep in mind that in the foreseeable future, I probably won't be uploading as many videos as I used to. With that said, I'd like to assure everybody that I'm still going to be recording videos and posting them onto YouTube and onto Rumble, and that I'm also more active on my Telegram channel than I am on YouTube or on Rumble. The link to my Telegram channel is in the video description as always, and I strongly encourage everybody to check out not just my Telegram channel, but also other Telegram channels, some of which I forward messages from onto my own Telegram channel, which report more regularly on various events that are taking place in the Ukraine war. I'd like to record a quick video today in light of recent news that we've received only a few hours ago, and that news is that the city of Lisichansk in the Lugansk People's Republic, or if you prefer, the Lugansk Oblast of Ukraine, is now completely under the control of Russian forces. And with the capture/liberation of Lisichansk, almost the entirety of the Severodonetsk-Lisichansk agglomeration, the population of which before the start of the war was 350,000, as well as almost the entirety of all of the Lugansk region of Ukraine, is now under Russian control. All that is left of the Lugansk region of the former Lugansk Oblast of Ukraine that is still under the control of the Ukrainian government is a few small villages that are located just several kilometers west of the city of Lisichansk. So no matter how you look at this situation, I think it's safe to say that in a few days we'll be hearing that the entirety of Lugansk Oblast, or the Lugansk People's Republic, is now under Russian control. So that is the first bit of news and observation that I wanted to put out there. Another observation that I want to make is that the capture of Lisichansk happened very quickly after Severodonetsk was captured. Russian news outlets and war correspondents announced on June 25th that all of Severodonetsk had been captured, as well as the entirety of the east bank of the Seversky Donets River in the area of Severodonetsk. And it should be noted that in terms of population and area, the cities of Severodonetsk and Lisichansk are more or less equal. That means that they are more or less equal in terms of their capability to be used as defensive positions. Now, of course, I'm oversimplifying things a little bit, but the general idea that I want to put out there is that in terms of strategic importance, these two cities are more or less the same. Lisichansk is located across the Seversky Donets River. It is located on higher ground. In fact, that actually makes attacking the city a bit more difficult than Severodonetsk. Now, the battles for Severodonetsk lasted for the better part of a month. After Severodonetsk fell, it took exactly 1 week for Lisichansk to come under the control of Russian and allied forces. And around the same time, the Ukrainian army also suffered a big encirclement around the towns of Gorskaya and Zolote, two towns which are located very close to the Severodonetsk-Lisichansk conurbation. In that episode, several thousand Ukrainian forces were surrounded and were forced to surrender. And only about a week after that, we are hearing news about the entirety of the Severodonetsk-Lisichansk agglomeration, effectively the entirety of that agglomeration, coming under the control of Russian forces. So what does this all tell us? Well, it certainly seems that the front line of the Ukrainian army, at least in this area, is now collapsed. The Ukrainian army is retreating much quicker than before and is being forced to give up important strategic and defensive positions while losing thousands of men in this area alone. And as one moves further westward from Severodonetsk and Lisichansk, there are only 2 more defensive lines that the Ukrainians can hold, at least in the Donbass area. There is the defensive line around the town of Artyomovsk, which the Ukrainians call Bakhmut, and there is also the defensive line in the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk conurbation. After that, there are basically no defensible positions that the Ukrainian army can hold in the entirety of the Donbass area. And a point that I've made many times in the past is that the Ukrainian defensive positions in Donbass have been steadily built up over the course of 8 years. There are no equivalent defensive positions anywhere else in Ukraine. There is no other location where the Ukrainian army has been building up its fortifications over the course of 8 years. So I expect that after all of these defensive positions fall, and the Russians choose to continue their offensive beyond the Donbass region, which they almost certainly will, that offensive is going to see the Russian and Allied forces advance much faster than anything that we've seen in the war thus far. And while I don't expect that this is anywhere close to the end of the entire war over Ukraine, I think that it is safe to say that we are reaching a breaking point. This is because the Russian military position is becoming stronger and stronger by the day, since first of all, you have the fact that all of these forces that were mobilized, especially the forces of the Donetsk and Lugansk people's militias, who have survived so many battles, are now combat veterans and are now much better equipped and supplied than they were at the start of the war. And at the same time, you also have more and more volunteers joining the war from Russia. So the Russian force is growing in terms of equipment and in terms of manpower. In fact, a separate note that should be made is the Russian military-industrial complex, which has picked up the pace a few months ago. I've noted already that Russian military-industrial facilities are working overtime and that the workers of these factories are working overtime to produce all kinds of ammunition and equipment for the war. And I think that we will be seeing the yields of that increased rate of production very soon. Of course, military hardware isn't something that you can create overnight. But several months have already passed, and we've actually heard of news reports of more military equipment that will be entering the war in the coming weeks and months. And in my opinion, the most notable are the Orion UAVs, or as they are also called, the Inohodets UAVs, which the Russian military has and has already used in the war, albeit in low numbers. The Russian military has seen a general lack of drone warfare capability, which would have proven very useful in the first weeks and months of this war, given the fact that Russia has complete control over the skies. And one of the ways in which it is being rectified is via the production of more of these Orion drones. And for those who are not aware about the Orion drone, the very, very short explanation of it is that it is basically the Russian equivalent of the Turkish Bayraktar UAV or the American MQ-1 Grey Eagle. That is, of course, a very, very rough explanation, but all of these weapon systems belong to one and the same class. Up until now, and including at this very moment, the Russian military has a general lack of such systems in terms of quantity, but that problem will be rectified very, very soon. And I should add that there are reports in Russian mainstream media that the workers at the factory that produces these drones are working 3 shifts in a row, and that it is expected that 12 of these drones will enter service with the Russian military in the month of July alone, a rate which I expect will continue for the foreseeable future. And when I say this, I really don't mean to focus only on drones, because the same is true for basically almost every other kind of military hardware that is being used on the ground in the Ukraine war. And by that, I mean heavy rocket artillery and cannon artillery, especially the very heavy 203mm and 240mm cannon artillery and mortars that the Russian army uses. I mean all of the various standoff cruise and ballistic missiles, which the Russian army has never had a lack of, but even in that area, the rate of production of those missiles is increasing, and the Russians are launching more and more intense salvos of these various cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. We are seeing more modern Russian tanks, so more T-80 BVMs and T-90Ms being sent into Ukraine alongside more modern infantry fighting vehicles on the Russian side. And all of this comes as the cream of the Ukrainian armed forces are being whittled down, and at this point, a number of reports from within the Ukrainian military itself, from all of these reports that I've talked about in my previous videos, all of these videos that the Ukrainian soldiers themselves record in a group where they complain about the lack of all kinds of equipment, all kinds of supplies, the distrust that they have in their leadership, and so on. In a number of these videos, it is stated that basically all of the volunteer force, all of the contract force that the Ukrainian military has had before the start of this war is now dead, wounded, missing in action, and so on. I may be exaggerating a little bit when I say the entirety of it, or rather, the soldiers that recorded these videos and said so might be exaggerating a little bit, since this comes from their mouth, not mine. But it is safe to say that the overwhelming majority of the army that Ukraine has had before February 24th is now non-existent. That manpower and that equipment has all been replaced by conscripts, by people who have been drafted, and by equipment that has either been pulled out of storage or has been sent to Ukraine as military aid from the West. And one final thing that I am going to note is something that I am sure many people who are watching this already know, and that is that only a small fraction of the Russian military is actually involved in the war in Ukraine. I'm sure that many of you have heard of various numbers of 150,000 Russian servicemen, 200, 250,000, and so on. Of course, this doesn't include the people's militias of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, 2 regions where basically all of the military-aged men, or at least the vast majority of them, have been conscripted and mobilized and are fighting alongside the Russian army. But to focus only on the Russian army and the Russian military for a moment, someone explained to me the following. The Russian army is indeed facing a shortage of manpower in Ukraine. However, there are several reasons for that. Well, actually one big reason, which boils down to the fact that there hasn't been any sort of mass mobilization in Russia. And I don't just mean the mobilization of conscripts. I've noted several times in the past that conscripts are not involved in any of the fighting that takes place on Ukrainian territory. In this war, the most that they've done is serve aboard some of the ships that are present in the Black Sea, and in one or two episodes, some Russian conscripts have shelled Ukrainian forces on the other side of the border. So the Russian conscripts were on the Russian side of the border at the time, but there haven't been any actual conscripts that have been sent into Ukraine to do any of the fighting. That is something that I've already noted in some of my previous videos. However, some new information that I found out and that I personally found to be very interesting is that not all of the professional Russian soldiers, not all of the Russian contractors are being sent into Ukraine either. In fact, none of the Russian contractors, or virtually none of them, perhaps a very small fraction of the Russian contract force, is actually being forced to fight in the Ukraine war. So, in essence, the overwhelming majority of the Russian army that is present in Ukraine is made up of volunteers, of professional volunteers, not just contract soldiers. I again want to emphasize this point. Not just professional soldiers, but specifically professional soldiers who have made the decision to go and fight in the war in Ukraine. And this is a consequence of the fact that any Russian military contractors, at this point in time at least, have the right to basically refuse to be deployed in Ukraine. They are allowed to write a letter of refusal which will prevent them from being sent into Ukraine, but will not prevent them from continuing their service in the Russian military. Now, of course, this was not true during the first weeks of the war. When the war began, all of a sudden, neither side really knew what was going on. At that point, it was physically impossible for any of the soldiers who fought in Ukraine back in February and March to write this letter of refusal, because at that point, they didn't know that they would be fighting in Ukraine the next day. But if we're talking about April and May and June, the overwhelming majority of the Russian force that is present in Ukraine is now made up of volunteers, both of professional Russian soldiers, active duty contractors who have not written this letter of refusal, and also of volunteers who are former contractors who have also made the conscious decision to volunteer to fight in the Ukraine war. So all of this crap that we're hearing from the Ukrainian and the European, the pro-NATO Western mainstream media about the Russians running out of manpower, about Russian conscripts being forced to fight in Ukraine, that is just unbelievable garbage and nonsense. That is not true in the least. And add to this the fact that both the Russian soldiers and the soldiers of the Donbass militias are being rotated once every, I believe it's once a month, but don't quote me on the exact time period. So basically the idea is that these soldiers fight for 1 month, they are active on the front lines for 1 month or whatever amount of time it is, and then they are sent home or they are sent to the rear to basically take a break before they're being sent back to the front lines, and you have these soldiers being rotated back and forth. Once you take that fact into account, you basically have a very small number of people that the Russians are using to fight this war in Ukraine. As Alexander Mercouris on the Duran and on his own personal channel has pointed out many times, this is a peacetime expeditionary force. This is nothing like the entirety of the Russian military, which consists of 1 million active duty soldiers, of which about 600,000 are contractors. So, in summary, the war is certainly not going poorly for Russia, as Western mainstream media so likes to pretend. The Russians are only deploying a small portion of their military capability in Ukraine, and they can basically keep that up forever. And not only are they winning with this small fraction of their total military, but they are gaining more and more overall military capability. So that is to say, not only are they becoming stronger relative to the Ukrainian armed forces, which are becoming weaker and weaker by the day, but the Russian military is also becoming stronger in absolute terms as well. So, as I've said before, unless NATO intervenes directly and on a massive scale, and I'm talking about nuclear missiles flying left, right, and center, the war in Ukraine is a done deal. One way or another, it will end in the complete military defeat of the Ukrainian armed forces. Once again, I am pointing this fact out to basically contradict all of the insane propaganda that has been put out in Western mainstream media and in political circles and is still being manufactured by the day about Ukraine beating Russia militarily. That is a stupid myth. It is a myth that never held any drop of truth. But in light of recent events, it is an even more insane and delusional myth. So, with the fall of Severodonetsk and Lisichansk, I expect that the next location which the Russian military will attempt to secure is the town of Artyomovsk/Bakhmut. I expect that I'll be making at least one video on that battle, depending on how it goes and how quickly it ends. I certainly expect that it will end in a Russian military victory sooner or later, if I am right about the fact that the Ukrainian defensive positions, the Ukrainian front line in this location is now either near collapse or has already basically collapsed, that battle might end very quickly, but we're going to have to wait and see whether or not I am right about that. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you enjoyed it, please remember to leave a like, and also please be sure to check out my other channels, the links to which are in the video description, especially my Telegram channel. I keep harping about Telegram because Telegram is a platform with no political censorship whatsoever, which Rumble is also, by the way. But Telegram is also very convenient in that it allows one to simply write short text-based posts that take a lot less time than making entire videos and are perfect for reporting on small little bits and details, small analyses, small bits of news, which one wouldn't normally make an entire video about. I'm aware of the fact that YouTube also allows this to some extent, but believe me when I say that it's much more convenient to both write and read this on Telegram. Anyways, that is all from me for today. Peace out.